Our podcast partner for this session is Launchora.
Welcome back to the front lawn of the 14th Jaipur Literature Festival protected by Dettol. Today we present No Country for Farmers. Kota Neelima, Surjit Bhalla and Dushyant Dave in conversation with Sanket Upadhyay. India lives in her villages, said Gandhi. Although agriculture is the most important sector of the economy, accounting for close to 16% of the GDP and providing employment to much of the nation's workforce, rural-urban distances and divides continue to grow. The incomprehension between those who contribute to growing our food and those who consume it widens by the day. All political parties claim to represent the farmer, but the tiller of the soil is mute and invisible in the process of decision-making. Climate change further impacts the uncertainties that farmers face. An engaged panel speaks of the paradoxes of policy and the complex issues involved in bringing about much-needed reforms and discusses the signposts ahead. Kota Neelima is an author, political scientist, and former journalist and writes on poverty, gender, electoral reforms, and democratic deficit. Her recent initiative, Rate the Debate, Reform TV News, is an extension of her doctoral research on the role of perception in electoral democracies. She has authored 7 books ranging from poverty to spirituality. Her recent book, Widows of Vidarbha, Making of Shadows, is a longitudinal study of farmer suicide households. Surjit Bhalla is Executive Director for India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Bhutan at the IMF. He has served as a part-time member of PM Modi's first Economic Advisory Council and chaired the high-level advisory group on trade. He is the author of several academic articles as well as 4 books on globalization, including The New Wealth of Nations. His first book, Between the Wickets, The Who and Why of the Best in Cricket, developed a model for evaluating performance in sports. His most recent book, Citizen Raj, Indian Elections 1952 to 2019, analyzed Indian elections since 1952 and accurately forecast the Modi victory in 2019. Dushyant Dave is a senior advocate and former president of SCBA. He has served as a member with the National Legal Services Authority and many international arbitration associations. Sanket Upadhyay has been a print and broadcast journalist for 18 years and has worked with HT Jaipur with NDTV as his first TV job. Sanket moved to Times Now, India Today, CNN News 18 and then back to NDTV in a second stint. He specializes in political reportage and hosts popular primetime shows on NDTV 24/7 and NDTV India. Please do remember to comment and ask questions by typing them in the comment section. We now present No Country for Farmers, Kota Neelima, Surjit Bhalla and Dushyant Dave in conversation with Sanket Upadhyay. Over to you, Sanket.
Our podcast.
All right, thank you very much for that introduction and welcome to the Jaipur Literature Festival. Such is the tragedy, we call it COVID times, that we have to do this online and not meet in the lawns of the Diggi Palace in Jaipur, what the Jaipur Literature Festival is associated with. But the conversations must go on, and I think the topic that we are discussing today is also extremely relevant. India is its farmers, said Mahatma Gandhi. You cannot imagine an India without its farmers. If you want to imagine an India or think of an India, you cannot picture the princely states. You have to picture the farmers. The farmers are India and India are farmers. But in this association, as we have moved into 7 long decades of our independence, have we forgotten this very basic equation? And thus we ask this question on the front lawn today. No country for farmers. Let me start with the initial comments of our panelists. We'll begin with you, Mr. Bhalla. Straight up, is India no country for farmers?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this discussion. I want to make clear that I am here as in my personal capacity and not as representative of the IMF or any other organization. On the farm laws, I think it is a very important discussion, as you rightly underlined. And what I hope to get out of this discussion is how do the farm laws exaggerate or decrease poverty? Gandhi had also said that the worst violence was poverty. And that is what I hope to emphasize, that the farm laws will bring about a reduction in poverty. And indeed, that the people protesting the farm laws, as I've written in several articles, represent the elite of the farmers, the richest farmers, who are in the top 3 or 4% of the income distribution of India. So I think we need to be very clear as to what are the objectives of farm laws, who do they benefit, and who do they hurt. And that the central concern has to be distributive justice. John Rawls had said a long time ago that the purpose of policy has to be bring about a improvement in those who are the poorest. Amartya Sen also echoed that was fairness is justice, that whatever policy we do has to be evaluated on a scale as to what does it do to the poorest of the population. And I think the farm laws, my view is that first, that should be our central concern. You said so in your opening comments as well about Gandhi and the poor. And I hope to elaborate and learn from the others as to how the farm laws are detrimental to the poorest farmers or are helpful to the poorest farmers.
Yes. Okay. Mr. Dave, no one that we have interviewed through the course of this entire farmers' agitation, it's been about 100 days of the farmers sitting in protest, and about 6 months since the farmers and various other organizations questioning the manner in which this law was brought about. No one questioned the need for reforms. Everybody said, yes, we do need reforms. It's essential. That is a pro-farmer thing to do. But what would you have to say about the manner in which the reform came about?
Well, first and foremost, good evening to everybody. The answer to that is very simple. Constitution is a fundamental document. And we as a nation must learn that there is something called constitutionality and constitutional morality, which must be observed by the executive, the parliament, and the judiciary, to the hilt. And if you read the Constitution and Constitution Assembly debates, you will find that agriculture is a subject which was never supposed to be touched by the parliament. In fact, if you open up a 7th schedule to the Constitution of India and see list 2, which is exclusively assigned to the state legislatures, you will find not just agriculture specifically mentioned in entry 14, or markets which are specifically referred to in entry 28 of that list. But there are 24 other entries which are all related to agriculture, including agriculture indebtedness, which are exclusively within the domain of the state legislature. And this is something which is important. So first and foremost, the enacting of these laws by parliament is absolutely unconstitutional. That is something which country must understand. On 14th of June 1949, during the Constituent Assembly debate, 2 members, Sibanlal Saxena and Brajesh Prasad, both specifically asked the drafting committee that please include agriculture in the union list. And T.T. Krishnamachari, who was speaking for the drafting committee, expressly rejected it, and I quote him. He said, agriculture happens to be the principal industry in this country and practically one of the main functions of the state. And beyond taking certain powers for the purpose of coordination, I do not think the center is at all capable of handling this vast problem. Now, this is something we must understand. So Parliament, the way it has done is something really remarkable, that it has stepped into an area which didn't do. Secondly, something very interesting. As late as December of 2019, the Standing Committee on Agriculture of the Parliament And this is something which very few people have noticed. Of the 7th Lok Sabha, Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. And the title of that discussion is Agriculture Marketing and Role of Weekly Gramin Hearts. In this, they say, and I quote this committee report, the committee therefore recommend the government to initiate consultation with the state government concerned to enhance the number of agricultural markets in the country for improvement of civic infrastructure, banking facility, digital connectivity, and other facilities in agricultural produce market committee markets. Committee desire government to devise a centrally sponsored scheme for modernization of APMC markets in the country. Committee also desire government to create marketing infrastructure in states like Bihar, Kerala, Manipur, Mizoram, and Sikkim, where APMC markets do not exist. Now, this committee is headed by BJP, and it is essentially controlled by the ruling party. This is the report. So, the manner in which these laws were passed, I mean, forget reforms. Nobody has really seriously thought about the pros and cons of this. So where was the need to push these laws in pandemic? Where was the need to push them into Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha within a matter of days? And where was the need to pass it in Rajya Sabha with voice vote when the opposition wanted division of votes? I personally feel that the way government has gone about grabbing this power, which exclusively belongs to the state, passing the laws, contrary to what is available on record, is a very, very serious erosion of constitutional morality, and it is very destructive of federal structure in the country.
Okay, Kota Neelima, the Prime Minister, when he was speaking on the motion of thanks in Parliament, did try to explain the need for these reforms. I know there was a typical polarized debate, as is the order of the day these days, but he mentioned that to basically give this argument that just because nobody asked for it, reform must not come, is not true. By that logic, there should not have ever been a triple talaq bill. By that logic, there should not have been any other social reform legislations. I want to know from you, Dushyant Dave has addressed the legal aspect of this debate, right? I want to know from you the need on the ground, your conversations with farmers, with organizations, with the work that you've done on the need for reform, and that too in this way.
Thank you, Sanket. Good evening and congratulations, Jaipur Literature Festival 2021, for this wonderful online avatar. And also focusing on such an important issue before the country, and my regards to the eminent panel. This title of the session, Sanket, I have grown a little fond of it in the last few days, because while the promotions were happening on social media, I received advice, which is in line with your question, which you were asking about the polarized debate, about to watch out for what I say in favor of the farmers. This says no country for farmers. So, that was the thing. So I don't know since when it has become risky to be pro-farmer, pro-poor. When did we get here? So that's number one. The number two issue which you were talking about is the need on the ground. I'm just coming back from Telangana, some of the remote parts, and the absolutely rural, the total hinterland, where people seldom get asked what their problems are. There have been over 67,000 farmer suicides in this country since 2014. We still do not have a very clear idea how to solve those problems. And I'm just going to talk about the need now beyond these larger issues. Number one, what about the women? These farm laws have added an extra layer of patriarchy to their functioning. Women farmers who are almost invisible to several governments, including this. And that's why I mentioned farmer suicides, because several of these rural households are also women-headed. And these have happened during several governments. I don't mean this or that government. It's been a continuing neglect and apathy. But there is definitely need for reform, but this is not reform. This is a way of corporatization. This is to enable it's simple as this. Any reform in agriculture right now to deal with rural distress has to have the small farmer at the center of it and build a universe which is supportive around that farmer. But these reforms have the big corporate at the center of it, and they have built a universe which will make these people make profits. These are not reforms.
But
That's what the
Neelima, didn't the Prime Minister not say that the core of this reform is to benefit the small farmer? He's often ignored. You know, the point that you're making, that we must think of the small farmer. That's exactly what the Prime Minister says. That's his constituency in this reform.
Then my question is, why are the farmers so scared? Now, whenever we talk about farmers, we are talking, the narrative of the supporters of the farm bills is about what the farmers are eating. It's not about 200 farmers. More than 200 farmers have died on the borders. So when you talk about, you know, how well heeled the farmers are who are protesting, where is the sensitivity? So I do not believe in this narrative that this will benefit the small farmers, number one, as far as the narrative is concerned. Now let's look at the facts. 86% small and marginal farmers in this country who have no bargaining power anyway. So now, instead of the mandis where there is government supervision, where it is a structured place for trading, they are having to enter unstructured trading places. Now, who's going to safeguard those people? Now, in any reform like this, I would have imagined someone with the support of policymakers and you know, probably his own vision, like the Prime Minister, would have created a hand-holding system where the farmers can enter into these changes, these reforms slowly. What was the rush? As Mr. Dave correctly said, why was this pushed down the throat of the country in a kind of a rush, which only looks motivated to me, because this definitely is not.
I think Kota Neelima addresses a very crucial point. Mr. Bhalla, I want to draw your attention. Many big economic reforms in this country have happened by way of an accident. I mean, we've seen bank nationalization, which was opposed and then accepted. Then you've got liberalization, which was opposed, then accepted. The Prime Minister says that even the Green Revolution was initially opposed and then accepted, and all of them benefited the country. And that's the logic the government gives behind railroading this legislation through and saying accepted because eventually you will benefit. Do you think that argument holds this time around?
Let me first address a couple of points that Mr. Dave and Ms. Neelima have made.
Sure.
Regarding, I know Dushyant for a long time. He's a very distinguished lawyer, represents or testifies in front of the Supreme Court law and all that. But I would draw his attention to, and I'm sure he knows about it, the Interstate Council wrote a report in 2015, and what they stated in there is that economic and social planning in entry 20 of the concurrent list is comprehensive enough to include planning and development of agriculture and related activities. He knows about this. Second, we know that the farm laws were presented to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court of India did not rule them unconstitutional and indeed agreed to appoint a committee, etc., so I'm sure the Supreme Court would not be appointing a committee to look into the farm laws, itself looked into the farm laws, if they thought the farm laws were unconstitutional. That's point number one. Number two, there is, this idea that the farm laws were brought in a hurry. There are more than 20 committees over the last 30 years that have looked into the farm laws, including the committee that I chaired, which was in 2018-19. So the argument that there has been, I think Mr. Dave said that no one has thought about these reforms. Let me assure him that there are volumes of thoughts and opinion by experts on these reforms as well as by lay people. So that argument, I'm afraid, does not hold ground at all. Then we come to farmer suicides. And what we have to look at is what do these reforms do to farmer suicides and debt, etc. I think the fact that, it so happens, as I'm sure Ms. Neelima knows, that housewife suicides are about 2 to 3 times more annually than farmer suicides. And what they are caused by, etc., it's a very complex issue which has to be studied, needs to be studied. But I think suicide in general is a subject that practically no one is an expert on. It's a tragic subject. So I would not invoke farmer suicides as a reason against the farm laws unless you try and prove or show, let alone prove, there is some link between them. So I think, as I stated, the third point on whether the farm laws benefit the small farmer. Look, what is it that the farm laws do? It's very important for people to get away from emotive discourse and get to the facts of the case. If bargaining power, Ms. Neelima said about bargaining power, well, basically only about 1% of the farmers sell or have marketable surplus to sell in the mandi, to sell in the APMCs to the government. They sell anyway, but at a lower price that they get rather than the MSP, the minimum support price, which happens to be the maximum price for produce, which is garnered, as everybody knows, by the large farmers who we see protesting, etc. So let's be clear that this, by allowing, the farm laws do not take away any liberty, any freedom of any farmer or any individual. If the farmer wants to sell to the APMC, she can go and sell to the APMC. Okay. If she wants to sell to somebody outside, she has the freedom to do so. How is that restrictive of equity? I do not know.
Okay, let me ask that question. Kota Neelima, I will give you a right to reply because Mr. Bhalla did mention something about women suicides and how should that be linked as anti-farm reform bill. So I'll come back to you in just a short moment on this point because I saw you raise your finger. But Mr. Dushyant Dave, you heard Mr. Bhalla basically say that this is an option being given to the farmer. It's an additional option, and why should the farmer be robbed of that additional option? He also talks about minimum support price actually becoming the maximum price in the case of many farmers, which is a problem that we see on the ground. I again come back to the main issue of the manner in which this has been addressed, because I don't think this point that Mr. Bhalla is raising has been addressed in these laws. For instance, there is no MSP in this new mandi.
Let us understand one thing. Prime Minister nobody can doubt Prime Minister's intentions. If he says that it is for farmers, he may just as well be right. Yeah. We have no idea. I'm a lawyer. I'm a constitutional expert. I have no idea. I do believe, and this is where Mr. Bhalla perhaps must give little leeway to me. Shriban Lal Saxena in the Constituent Assembly said exactly what Mr. Bhalla is advocating today. And I quote him. He said that agriculture and land revenue systems all over India should be amenable to planning on an all India scale. This was precisely rejected by constitutional forefathers. And I have much more respect for them than any one of our parliamentarians for last 75 years, first and foremost. Secondly, Mr. Bhalla very rightly said Chief Justice himself did not declare them to be bad and said a committee. Yes, he is right. But the problem is that the Supreme Court of India in last few years is not just simply not willing to hear any controversial matter which would require them to independently decide matter, be it 370, be it CA, be it farm laws. But What is against Mr. Balla and the government is that a constitution bench of the Supreme Court in ITC versus Agriculture Produce Market Committee in 2002 has expressly said Parliament cannot legislate on agriculture. So these are the three most important. Now, so far as these the laws are frankly oversimplification of existing law. The existing contract law specifically, allows anybody and everybody to enter into agreements. Even a farmer can enter into an agreement. And if he enters into agreement to sell his wheat at 1,000 rupees a quintal, and I buy it at 1,000, I'm under an obligation to pay 1,000 rupees a quintal. You didn't need a law for that. And that's what that first law is, the so-called empowerment law. It's called Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act. It only guarantees that farmers will get what is contracted for. But if there is a problem, he can't go to court. He has to go to district magistrate for, ventilating his grievances, which is shocking. They have virtually excluded judiciary from deciding this dispute. Secondly, this level playing field, you may be right. But if 86% of farmers are small and marginal, where is the question of level playing field? I will say, look at industry, India's topmost industry, most powerful industry. The moment China starts dumping goods, they all run to government crying, please impose anti-dumping duties. What does that show? It shows that even the mightiest are not able to withstand the kind of tactics that the large country like China forces on poor countries like India. Likewise, if the corporates are going to really impose their will on these small farmers, it is going to be impossible for them. The mandi system today is a collective bargaining mechanism for them. You are taking away that collective bargaining mechanism from them completely. So if you're in December 2018, and I respect Parliament, if Parliament Standing Committee says that you should in fact strengthen the Agricultural Produce Market Committee, then what was it that they got within few months to bring this legislation? Where is the discussion? Where is the law? I'm sorry, all these discussion of last 20 years, there are counter discussions also. Mr. Balla is right. There are 100 papers saying that there should be reform, but there are 200 papers saying that there should be no reform in agriculture. So I think these kind of papers are frankly nothing but academic papers, which are many a times motivated papers. I don't mean any disrespect, but we needed to look at this law very objectively, because that is one sector which employs the largest number of people in the country. And they are the most vulnerable and poor people. Walking across the country.
Okay.
So I think I don't agree with Mr. Balla that to me these laws are illegal per se. That's the end of the matter.
Mr. Dave, you have, and I'm just quoting the political discourse, you have highlighted a problem that does not exist as of this moment, according to the government. You are highlighting a problem potentially that may come in the future, i.e., by definition, you may be an Andolanji.
Of course, and I'm proud to be one.
Okay.
I'm proud to be one.
Okay. Kota Neelima first, and then Mr. Bhalla again. Yes, Kota.
Thanks. One, of course, before I address those two issues which Mr. Balla had said, one about the MSP, the second about the distress and the bargaining, etc. The farmer suicides are not a mental health issue. That is the way to minimize them. I think this is a point, researchers and people in academics have been saying for years. I have been writing articles and books on this, and so have several others. It is not an issue which can be equated with any other farmer suicide. It is a convergence of policy failure. It is a convergence of policy failure, neglect of the farmer by the politicians, the government, even the society. It's a convergence of several issues, which now, because of the farm laws, get only worse. For instance, now I've come to the other point which he was talking about. There is no such thing as an empowered farmer in India. The idea of an empowered farmer who can bargain with the corporates at an equal level, get into dispute resolution at an equal level, a farmer who can fight for his prices in unstructured areas, and can grow diversified crops, just the next season, does not exist. He exists, as Mr. Balla said, in those 20-30 committee reports. He exists, or he or she, this empowered farmer, only exists on paper. For those policymakers who think the rest of India looks like the best of Delhi or the best of Mumbai, it doesn't work that way. The farmer is deeply dependent on almost personal relationships with the private moneylender who lives next to his or her house. Their household depends on the kind of relationships they have with their government officials, with the bank officials, and the traders. Now, all these are going to go and tilt towards the corporates. That's where the bargaining power cannot be assured by the leaders of this nation when you have a law which legitimates exploitation. And that's what I wanted to underline. Everything in the farm laws as they stand today legitimate exploitation of the small and marginal farmer on the ground. That has been my research in the last few months. Now, talking about MSP, I totally agree. We need reform. The MSP has to be reformed. But personally, I think the MSP should be revised higher. If there is any reform, that's what the reform has to be done as far as the MSP is concerned. MSP works as a benchmark. It doesn't matter how many people go to the mandis to sell, but it serves as a benchmark which protects the farmer from lower prices. I'm sure policymakers know this, and I'm sure even those who are opposing these farm bills understand the importance of MSP. Now, why is the MSP the absence of MSP when the mandis start closing down simply because of this unequal spaces? Why is it going to have an adverse impact? The farmer, any farmer across the country, builds his world on the structure and on a few structures: MSP, land rights, mandis, and obviously loans and those things. These 4 or 5 things are his reasonably constant things around which his life is built. Now, the farm laws in one go, and without giving any option of adjustment, they just take almost all of these away. Okay. Whether it's contract farming and land rights, whether it's MSP and APMC, everything is overnight taken away from the farmer. And are we saying this is good for the small farmer? I don't think so.
Okay, Mr. Bhalla, you've heard what Kota Neelima has to say. She's put up a very passionate defense for the farmers against these laws. But one crucial point, which is also an audience question, by the way, Mr. Bhalla, is the issue of MSP. By the way, guaranteeing MSP or making it a statutory provision was something which was recommended by the former Chief Minister of Gujarat and the present-day Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi. He himself said that there should be a statutory right of the farmers to make MSP, a legal entity. In these reform laws, why has that been skipped or missed? Do you think that if that one cushion would have been provided, none of these protests would have existed?
Look, there are 100, as Mr. Dave knows, there are 125 amendments to the Constitution. Similarly, there are several changes. Prior to 1991, as Sanket, you know very well, there were laws and they were changed. So therefore, and the politicians themselves, now talking about change, you know that the Chief Minister of Punjab commissioned a report in June of last year, which recommended precisely these laws that have been formulated by the government. So if we are going to get into that, listen, you cannot change your mind, then I'm afraid, as you know, Keynes said, when the facts change, I change my mind. So this entire discussion about who said what when, we can go on forever, but I think it's completely inconsequential to the issue at hand. Now, you said correctly, Ms. Neelima made a passionate defense. I think the emphasis is on passion, not on facts. There was not one single fact, I don't mean a number, but a fact that was mentioned by her as to why the farm laws would hurt the small farmer. Then we come to the MSP. Who does the MSP? As you know, as Ms. Neelima knows, she's a very distinguished journalist. They are farmers in Bihar who sell their produce to somebody who takes it to Punjab so that it can be sold through the APMCs. Then we have Mr. Dave saying about bargaining power and anti-dumping duties. The mandi system, how does it give bargaining power when you have the MSP? The MSP is decided by the government. And these farmers who are rich enough, influential enough, and have political connections enough that they are able to sell. So much so that they buy the produce from a Bihari farmer at a much lower price and sell it to the government. Who is talking about bargaining over here? I mean, look, we really need to take passion out. We need to take emotions out. Let us look at this. Nobody has yet answered the question as to how does the law hurt anybody. You still have the freedom to do whatever you want to do. How can allowing more freedom hurt your bargaining power? I just do not.
I want to respond to Kota Neelima saying that once you have these laws mandated by Parliament tilted strongly in favor of the private mandis, which will eventually lead to the decaying of the existing system, and then moving towards the private
mandate exists. There's a private mandi. It exists because farmers cannot go and sell at MSP to the government. Why don't you address that simple issue? Who sells? You are a senior editor at a TV channel. Why don't you just look at this issue? All the facts are available. Who sells at the mandis? Who sells at the APMC? Who sells to the MSP? Why don't you just do a simple study? It'll be a great show on NDTV as to who are the farmers who sell to the government. And why? And I think maybe it was on your channel that there was a story about Bihari farmers selling to Punjabi farmers who can then take the produce from there and sell it in the mandi in Punjab.
Yeah, Mr. Balla, I wouldn't know of that report offhand, but I definitely know of a report that this Bihar experiment that you're talking about, which in a muted way has implemented this law, has not got very positive initial results. I do remember that story, but I'm going to come back to you. Yeah, I'm going to come back in just a moment.
There are so many stories. Just why doesn't anybody on this show, including you, answer the question, which farmer is able to sell at MSP and what proportion and where are they from?
Okay, I'm going to take that to Kota Neelima in just a short moment, but let's take the first question. This question, and then we can decide who answers this question. Mansi asks.
Just a sec. I want to say something.
Dushanji. Yes.
One thing, Mr. Balla is right. Who is hurt? Let me remind him. The Constitution is hurt. The rule of law is hurt, and it's far more important than any individual farmer getting hurt. To me, to a democracy, it means the most. Now he wants to know the fact. Yes, let me give him the fact. Please, I beg him to read the election manifesto of the Bharatiya Janata Party in last election. They made 12 promises in that. They never said that we are going to bring reforms that they have brought. So please, for God's sake, I mean, it's unfortunate that in this country, every political party takes the electorate for a ride by giving all kinds of promises. That manifesto said that by 2020, we will double the income of the farmers. It says specifically, and I'll read it. It says, at the very beginning of our current term, Prime Minister Modi embarked on a mission to double farmers' income. We will make all efforts to achieve this goal by 2022. I mean, it's a joke. These are the facts, Mr. Balla. Why are you asking facts? The fact is that BJP never thought of bringing these kind of laws. I don't know what happened suddenly, that during pandemic, they rushed these provisions. Somebody had drafted it. Somebody never saw it. I mean, legally, These are so faulty, they are so poorly drafted that I can tell you one thing, that if it is before a fiercely independent Supreme Court, these laws will not stand scrutiny even for a minute. Fiercely independent Supreme Court. Let me tell you that. So
let's get a response to that.
There's an old line.
Mr. Balla, by the way, by the admission of the own, by the admission of
There's
the
an old
government,
line from Khrushchev, who states, what is mine, what is yours is negotiable. And that, I'm afraid, is Dushan Dave's position. What he thinks is right and what everybody else thinks and
no,
does
I said
is wrong.
Constitution. I didn't say
Yeah, on the Constitution.
BJP
Why are there 100?
It's not my
Mr.
manifesto.
Dave, if there are 125 amendments,
Yes.
each amendment goes through several lawyers' opinions and changes. Are you trying to tell me
There
that
is
when you
nothing.
go to the
You are
Supreme
right,
Court,
Mr.
there
Balla.
is not a
Constitution
difference
is
of
not
opinion?
amended to give power to
Getting away
Parliament
from-
on agriculture. Constitution is not
no,
amended.
I'll have to come in here. Kota Neelima needs to respond. But Mr. Balla, see the point on amendments. The point is this very law, within a few months of it coming into existence, had to go through a lot of amendments. Now, surely you cannot, sell this as the government trying to be so proactive in listening to the people that it has to amend its law or propose amendments within a few months of bringing the law in. That clearly means that it was not thought through. Of course, the government does mention that we are trying to listen to the farmers, we are trying to listen to the people. Anyway, Kota Neelima, very quickly, you wanted to come in? And then
Yes, I just wanted to say that passion is what got us here. I mean, excuse me, if we are passionate about the poor farmers and poverty in this country, I mean, dispassionate is what I think we are heading towards. And I think there is a passion towards the corporates now, which has to be addressed. I mean, somehow I think that's where the shift is happening. And it's mysterious, as Mr. Dave was saying. We got to know why there was such a rush. Maybe perhaps you can tell us those facts as well. The thing which I wanted to quickly say was one issue which clearly points out the tilt towards corporates, and I'm talking about facts, is here with me, the bill which clearly says that dispute resolution in case of a contract farming is tilted heavily against the farmers. Why couldn't the government, which was so, in so much of propaganda was saying it is for the poor farmers, make it necessary by adding just a few lines that the corporates have to adhere to their agreements and respect them, and the farmers' vote would be final. It was as simple as that. That's all I want to say.
Mr. Balla's right to reply.
The farmer can choose not to go to the corporate. The whole point is on economic freedom, on freedom. Why do you want to legislate who the farmer should go to? The farm laws do not legislate. It gives them the option. There's a clear difference between giving somebody the option. After all, that is what a democracy is about, option.
The farmer doesn't have an option of choosing his crop in this country, because the moneylender who holds the power, the financial power over what the farmer is doing, he decides what crop the farmer grows. Now, when you replace these structures with a corporate, how much autonomy do you think a farmer will have? None.
Okay. I'm going to have to come in here because there are 3 questions waiting. And I'll read out the questions and you can decide who answers. Mansi asks, why is land reform not discussed? Perhaps that's the kind of reform we need if people here are so concerned with small and marginal and women farmers. Who would like to respond? Maybe Mr. Bhalla can go first.
No, look, we're not land reform. This is a part of agricultural reform. One interesting thing about agricultural reforms is that most developing countries, when they undertake reforms, economic reforms, agriculture is the first subject that they do reforms on, like your question on land reforms. In India, it is about the last subject that is being exercised. And I think all of us should take a look at the political economy of India, of influence, of the powers that be, as to why agriculture is the last issue touched and why it was not touched in 1991 when there was an opportunity for reforms. And the same story is repeated, as I just mentioned, which none of your panelists are answering. We have that the Punjab government in June of this year, before the laws were passed in September, essentially argued, did a whole report on what agriculture is needed. Punjab has been ecologically destroyed, and by the policies of the government, of the Punjab government, since it is a state subject, as well as by the central government through the MSP. So we need to look into what has caused the ecological disaster. Why is Punjab, which is so deficient for water, is growing rice? Why is this not mentioned? Why is this crime against ecology, climate? Why is this not being mentioned? And before Dushyant Dave answers my question, please in there answer the question as to the Punjab government. After all, these are Punjabi farmers that are at the forefront. That why is it that Punjab government argued for exactly these same laws?
Okay, I mean, I wish we had a government spokesperson here to answer that question, but yeah, Mr. Dave, see, the point is, based on my discussion and my debates, we asked this question of the representatives of the Punjab government, and they said that when we were batting for privatization or private mandis, we wanted it along with the legal teeth for the farmers, something which is missing in these central laws. So that's the explanation that is coming from the Congress, just putting it on record. Dushyant Dave.
Let me say 2 or 3 things. If Punjab government recommended that, it was wrong. And I'm so happy that, they have accepted that position. But Mr. Bhalla is completely overlooking what I began my debate with, that there is a report of the 17th Lok Sabha Standing Committee on Agriculture in December 2019. Now, if Parliament Standing Committee says, you, Mr. Government, strengthen the APMC, then what more do you need than that? There is a complete, disconnect between the Parliament and the government in doing this for whatever reason. I can't fathom those reasons. Secondly, it's easy for Mr. Bhalla to say that why are they producing rice? The 4% of world's freshwater resources are consumed by textile industry. I asked today that let government pass a law and say all existing textile industry should stop producing textiles and switch to some other product. Will they be able to do it? I can't understand these kind of arguments against poor farmers. Why then shut down all these top mills of the country from which are there in Punjab also, and Haryana also, and Gujarat also. The reforms cannot come in Gujarat. For example, I am a Gujarati. In Gujarat, I cannot buy agricultural land because I am not a farmer, although my grandfather was a farmer. These are the kind of laws that even Prime Minister, Mr. Modi as Chief Minister for 12 years did not think about. And even if you existing farmer wants to buy, he must buy within a radius of 7 kilometers, another farm. These are all, things to protect the farmers. The reforms really can't be done. It's easy to say reforms. Nobody says, let us reform. For example, telecommunication sector. Why give license to Reliance, Jio and Airtel alone or Vodafone? Give it to 1,000 people and see what they can give. Today, we are victims of these large corporates where we have to agree to whatever, price that they charge. We might say.
But then, Mr. Dave, that's how the telecom story began. If you recall, long ago, you had many players.
In every field, therefore, in this country, there are.
I thought we were discussing farm laws.
I am not for a moment. I am not for a moment. I am just giving an analogy. I am saying that, look, there are serious issues. Okay. I'm not for a moment suggesting that we should not reform. Of course, the life is about reforms.
Okay.
But when the central figure in that reform is not heard, and to simply say that Punjab farmer is affected.
I suggest I'll be happy to come on your TV show.
Yeah.
Have a section on suicides. Have a section on telecommunications. Have a section on textiles.
Yeah.
But I thought here we are talking about
farmer. That's true. No, he was just making an analogy.
Mr. Bhalla,
the analogy takes up 90% of the point.
Mr. Bhalla, I'm sorry. You like to wish away everything that one says, and you are only telling gospel truth. I'm sorry, I do not agree with your approach at all. With greatest respect and that I have for you and my friendship for you.
This is turning out to be
every one of the things I said is factual.
Turning out to be like my program, The Big Fight. One more question.
Exactly. May I just get to the
there is a question for for you. I just have
Punjabi,
2
to
more
which
minutes left.
Mr. Balla has been insisting that we answer.
We just have 2 more minutes left on this broadcast. There's a question from Kota Neelima. With the farmer suicide still on the rise with status quo ante in agriculture sectors, isn't the change in the agriculture sector the need of the hour?
Absolutely. And I firmly believe that we have to change several things in the agricultural sector, in the markets, the way the farmers go to the market, do not get the right price. That is one of the reasons why farmer suicides happen. But the answer is not to leave their hands in the hands of in the hands of the corporates, not to leave their lives in the hands of corporates who are only going to bother about their own profit. That is definitely not a solution. For that, the government has to develop trust that this is the solution, and then we will perhaps see that. But this is not the way to do it. Number two, talking about Mr. Balla's has been repeating that the Punjab, why has it supported? It did not, if I am not wrong, it has not supported the same laws, and the Punjab government has also promised to give MSP not just on other commodities as well as on fruits as well as vegetables. So I don't think the stand of the Punjab government actually compares to the central farm laws. Thank you.
Okay. Question from Mr. Bhalla. Mr. Malhotra says, and I'm quoting him, Mr. Bhalla's own example of farmers in Punjab buying from poor Bihari farmers and then selling it at MSP in the APMC mandis is exactly what these laws will further encourage private corporates to do. Mr. Bhalla, your response.
It encourage private corporates to do what? Here is an example where the price faced or price received by a farmer in Punjab, by a rich farmer in Punjab, is much higher than the price received for the same commodity by a poor farmer in the rest of India. And as you have emphasized throughout this show, is that 96% or whatever, very, very large percentage of the farmers are not selling at MSP. So please, I think the number is 6% that do sell at MSP. 94% are not selling at MSP. So what we have to ask is, what are we doing in order that a poor farmer, and after all, I started the discussion, at least my opening statement, poverty and the poor farmer is what should be our central concern. And I think that's what the other panelists also agreed, that the poor farmer should be of concern.
Sure.
The farm laws do not prohibit, only help the poor farmer. Maybe the farm laws hurt the rich farmer. And that is something we need to incorporate into our discussion as to why the protests have come about and why is it the case that we have most of the poor farmers not coming out and protesting. So please, before we get into who's coming to protesting, just why can't we address a simple, straightforward, factual point? Only 6% of farmers.
Each one of your statement is not borne out by fact. This 6% selling of MS, even in a rich state like Gujarat, MSP is taken by large number of farmers. I know it as a matter of fact. So please don't just make these kind of statements and say that rich farmers are complaining. Yes, rich farmer may be benefiting and they may be party to it, but the poor farmer is really going to be hurt. And that is where you must really realize that you can't just generalize like this and make these statements.
How is the poor farmer
by any fact? I have not read anywhere that only 6% of the produce goes to MSP. If that is so, then why can't the government amend the law and leave it to the states that statutorily you will put MSP as and when required, and no corporate or no other trader will buy at a price less than MSP? Okay. You can just bring one amendment into the law. It's so simple to do it.
One recommendation, and I'd like to get the panelists' opinion.
Very quickly,
what we should all be arguing for is that the government goes ahead and procures wheat, rice, which are the two major crops, now pulses, from each state in the country in proportion to whatever the state produces and has a marketable surplus. This is a federal country, we should have the poor farmers and the rich farmers in every state benefit from the MSP. Can anybody object to that? And I think that should be what we should all be arguing for, that MSP, government procurement be done from every state in the country. Every state either produces.
Why didn't the law bring that? You are right, absolutely. Why doesn't the law think about it? And why doesn't government think about it despite 3 months of protest and 200 deaths?
Okay.
And I totally agree. Why can't MSP be made legal? If that is the point, then let's make MSP
There's one
legal.
interesting question. I have to come in here because it's 55 already and we're running out of time. But the one crucial question Dharani asked, don't you think these farm laws are taking away the revenue stream from the state to the center? We know agriculture is a state subject. Wouldn't it be a cause of concern for many states who are considered poor? Would center be able to justify the allocation of money in such cases? Kota Neelima, would you like to respond very quickly? Closing comment.
I just know what has recently happened in Telangana, which is actually a showcase case for what will happen probably all across the country, that there is a shift of policy from procuring in the state itself. So they have said people are farmers are not going to go to, there are going to be no procurement mandis. And there's a U-turn absolutely from, the political U-turn from supporting, from opposing farm laws to supporting them. So that's what is going to happen. States are going to step back from actually supporting the small and marginal farmers. Remember, these state mandis are deep into the villages. That way the farmers don't have to travel long distances. These are not going to be there.
Sanket, what is happening today? Just a sec. Sanket, what is happening in GST today? All states are standing in queue begging the government, that's government of India, that give us the money of our share. They are not giving. And the same Prime Minister for 12 years opposed GST as Chief Minister of Gujarat. So these powers being grabbed by the central government are definitely at the cost of federal structure, as I began by saying, and they are going to hurt. And the revenue of the states, especially of the mandi, through the mandis, is bound to suffer very badly. No doubt.
Mr. Dave, Mr. Bhalla, as well as Kota Neelima, thank you very much. We have overshot our scheduled time, but this was engaging as always. And towards the end of this, I can definitely say that we may want to debate by saying that this is no country for farmers, but clearly farmers have a way of making their voice heard, and they're doing it loudly for the government to hear. Thank you very much.
Three cheers to farmers.
Thank you, Kota Neelima, Mr. Bhalla, Dushyant Dave and Sanket for that insightful and thought-provoking conversation. It is an essential conversation that we all need to have in today's time. We'd also like to thank our celebration partner Diageo for their support, and to all of you for being such a lovely audience. Please do stay logged on to continue to watch with us the series of exciting sessions that we've specially curated for you. As you're aware, the cultural sector has been impacted by the pandemic, and while we have braced ourselves and tried to embrace the new normal, we have struggled to ensure that we can continue to bring to you a free flow of knowledge and ideas. We'd love your support towards Teamwork Arts. Any contribution is welcome. Please do remember to tweet using hashtag Jaipur Literature Festival 2021 and tag us at Jaipur Lit Fest. The festival is protected by Dettol. We hope to see you in our next session.
To all storytellers and story lovers, my name is Laksh Datta. I host and produce the Jaipur Bites podcast, where you can hear many of the amazing sessions from the Jaipur Literature Festival. I also produce a few other podcasts, as you can see right here. English, Hindi, fiction, non-fiction. If you see something you like, maybe you can take a screenshot of this right now. I'll give you a second. And tune in later. Find them on your favorite podcast app.